Hi, my name is Eric Rosenthal. I'm a visual effects artist and instructor in Los Angeles. I've worked on big projects such as Kung Fu Panda: The Dragon Knight, Hotel Transylvania, and Meet the Robinsons, as well as my own short movies. I can teach you the tools and techniques you can use to create your own animations using software such as Maya, Blender, Houdini, and Nuke. Here are some of my sample lessons. I'm going to show you how heat distortion is added to this shot of a hovering spaceship. First, I render images of a particle animation coming from the jets. This matte image will determine where to create the heat distortion. I add a blur to the matte. Then I break it up with noise. The speed and size of the noise will determine the look of the heat distortion. Note that I'm using two different noise patterns. The red noise warps the image with a horizontal distortion, and the green noise warps the image with a vertical distortion. Here's the original image before and after the distortion. Here's the animation with the distortion. Now I add a slight blur to the distorted region. Also a slight brightness increase to the region. The background plate looks a little too static, so I'm going to use the same method with noise distortion and add some life to it. And here is the final shot. In 3D, I create a fluid simulation of smoke. This is done by simulating density, velocity, and temperature moving through a 3D grid in a physically accurate way. Now I'm adding some twisting motion of the smoke to give it some character. Next, I add a particle simulation that follows the smoke. The smoke generates the motion of the particles. Here we have a few hundred particles. Now I increase the particle count to 100,000 particles. They're also smaller and motion blurred. Now I really crank up the number of particles to several million. They're even smaller and the render is slower. This creates the smooth look so you can no longer see the points. Now I take rendered images into the 2D compositing software. I boost the red using a gamma correction so the lower values are more saturated. This gives us a white core and a colored edge, which is typical of glow effects. I add several glows, which are just blurred copies added to the original image. And now we have a pretty cool effect. Fireworks may seem like a difficult effect to create, but I'm going to break down a way to do it step by step. I start with a small number of particles launching upward, one for each firework. Note the variation in particle direction and lifespan. Next, I add a jagged shape that pops on for one frame when the particle dies. We'll turn this into a flash of light later. Also, when the particle dies, I add a burst of green particles. They're green so I can adjust the color separately. The green particles move down with gravity. Now I add blue particles trailing from both sets of particles. These are also affected by gravity and have random lifespans. I can use the red, green, and blue colors of the particles to separately adjust the colors of each set of particles. Now I put together the particles with modified colors and add glows. The glows are just blurred copies added to the original image. Here's our final animation. There's a lot more I could do to improve this effect, such as smoke, flickering, and motion blur, but this is a good starting point. I start with this animation of a car. I'm going to add fire trails from the tires step by step. First, I emit particle trails from the car tires where they touch the ground. The particles will emit the fire. The particles don't move and have a random lifespan, so the trails fades out smoothly. The problem is the trails fade out too smoothly and evenly. I want to create patches of particles on the ground. I'm going to use this noise pattern to bump up the lifespan of the particles in random areas. This creates our random patches of fire-emitting particles, so we will have random patches of fire. Here is our fire animation with the fire emitted from the particles. Now we can get rid of the particles because we just want the fire. I still need to render and light the fire and the car, which I'll show in a future video. Here are some shots from a commercial where I used this method to add fire trails to live-action footage of a car.